I call the member for Hasluck.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I had the privilege this morning of meeting with the National Stolen Generations Alliance, who had a breakfast in which there were two speakers who left an indelible impression on the hearts and minds of those who were in attendance. Both were taken and adopted as young children. They were taken from their mothers, adopted. One ended up in Wales, another ended up in London. Both, throughout their period of life, realised there was something different about them because they couldn't see any other cultural grouping that looked anything like theirs. And through that period of time, both came to a realisation that there would be a point in their lives in which they needed to backtrack and have a look at where their families were. Both described their experiences of talking to their adopted families, the support they did and didn't receive, but both made the journey back to Australia. For Levin, when he came back, he discovered where his parents were, his biological parents, and where his brothers and sisters were. His reunion was much more challenging because there was a difference, or as he described, a brick wall, although he has been slowly working through some of those challenges. Leonie, on the other hand, was fortunate that she had a sister who on her link-up file wrote a letter, should she ever inquire, with all the details of who her mother and father were, her brothers and sisters, and a point of contact. So when she came back to Australia, she was able to make that contact and re-establish the linkages with her family. And she struggled, but she also appreciates the fact that she now is reunited. When the former Prime Minister, Kevin Rudd, delivered the apology in the House, as I've said previously in this chamber, he created a healing process that was absolutely critical to this nation. It was an acknowledgement of decisions and policies that had good intent, but their unintended consequences were far greater and far more reaching in the pain and grief that it caused. And I had the privilege of meeting with the boys from Kinchilla home in New South Wales and heard some of their stories, which when you sit and listen to the emptiness that they described in their lives when they were within an institution, it left you with a sense of what they would have had as an opportunity and a pathway had they been with their families and not institutionalised, nor experienced the pain that they did. But in all of the stories that I have heard, those that I have read and those that have been provided to me by elders and by those who've been affected through the stolen generation, including my own mother, where bitterness prevailed, there is a replacement of forgiveness. There is a replacement in terms of knowing that there was a recognition by the Prime Minister and the Australian Parliament that the events that occurred to them was made known to Australian society. And I know when I travelled overseas, I went to Europe, and one of the things that came up constantly were people who would say that they were pleased. And certainly when I was in the Emirates, I had comments saying that they respected the fact that there was an acknowledgement of the First Nations people. And I assume that's only because of the travel and the business arrangements that prevail between countries, but certainly it was acknowledged in that context. Mr Deputy Speaker, I want to read the charter of the Ngunnawal Elders because I think when they went through a process, and this morning I was given with some pride the stories of the Ngunnawal people who were affected by the stolen generation and who were taken. But in their optimism, because one of the things I've always respected about our people or our mob is that we have tremendous capacity to forgive when challenges have always besetted us. And those challenges we've seen as points in time, but we've also negotiated and moved on from where we've been. But the Charter says this: our unity is a journey of healing. We have taken the first big step, and along the path and people will join with us and leave, but everyone is welcome. In welcoming people, we know the following to be true: that our elders have our respect, we are honoured by their giving respect back, we acknowledge them for assuming responsibilities as leaders in our community. We need to come together to create our future, one in which everyone has a place where they can feel proud, have dignity, and feel that they belong. That communication is everything, and we do this in a supportive way to know more about each other, our history and our culture. These knowledges we make are ours together, although it belongs not only to us, but it is also for our kids and our grandkids too. And it is for them that we do this work now. It takes courage to do work for the greater good. We need to learn how to solve problems, include, not isolate, to listen with our hearts and to speak from our souls. In being courageous, we are a direct link to the Dreamtime. This is the essence of our Aboriginality, as is our relationship to land. In this journey, we strive for unity. We do this by empowering people, creating confidence, self-esteem, and room for difference so we can work and laugh together moving forward all the while. We, each and every one of us, wants this not only for ourselves and our families, we want this too for the people who need it the most. And the alliance of the National Stolen Generations today brought together members of the Stolen Generation to talk about the future, to look at the opportunities that lie ahead in this great country of ours. And they talk and share the experience of the pain, but that pain is not an inhibitor to the way that they want to see the knowledge of the past to be equally all of ours, but also the knowledge of the future and the directions we take to be that of all Australians in concert with the people of the First Nations. It is about the way in which we create the opportunities. And in their statement and their Stolen Generations Working Partnership, what they talk about are the priority issues, the things that they want to see that will change so that we never have the past repeated on any group for any reason. And then we look at the respect, the dignity, the understanding. I would love to see universities around this country adopt 20 members of the Stolen Generation so that they are able to be part of the processes of lifelong learning, to be engaged in some of the forums and discussions that will occur around Indigenous affairs, and to be able to tell a chapter within the history of Australia, but from a point of engagement where people can seek to understand, where people can ask questions and have answers. I must say I enjoy a privileged position in this House because I do have members of this Parliament from all parties at different times come and ask me questions about our people, our mob. And they'll say sometimes, can I ask you a politically incorrect question? But to me, no question is politically incorrect if you are seeking to enhance your knowledge and to increase your understanding. And I think in that sense, there is a beauty in having members of the Stolen Generation working and being part of university life, because our greatest knowledge acquisition, other than the early years of our life, certainly comes through the tertiary institutions which so many Australians attend, including overseas students. And what a rich, living cultural history that they would participate within and share within. But the members of the Stolen Generation talk about accessing services equally and across all areas consistently. I certainly support the Closing the Gap measures because they do address the very issues that the Stolen Generation have continually raised. But one of the challenges in closing the gap, it is not uniform across the nation. It is not uniform in terms of urban, rural and remote. However, nevertheless, there is a focus on some very critical areas, but we still have much to do. They talk about the greater awareness being needed across government and non-government agencies. The former Prime Minister said, if we are not finding solutions to the problems, then maybe there is a better way that we need to do business. And certainly the Stolen Generation have put forward the proposition on several occasions that they want to be equal partners. They want to be there to help shape the future, the services and the access to what is offered to all Australians, not just through Indigenous monies. Because as a society, in governments, we provide for all, regardless of their location. We should, again, ensure that there is continuity in access to government services. I deliberately use the term government services because mainstream services, I think, has a connotation and a mindset around it, whereas any service provided by a government is provided to the citizens of that nation and that country, and certainly within the jurisdictions. They have been very strong in helping to heal those whose pain and grief is still problematic. If you want to read a piece of research that is significant and really highlights that intergenerational impact, then I would commend to members a report written by the West Australian Institute of Child Health under the leadership of Professor Fiona Stanley. The WA Aboriginal Child Health Survey went beyond something like 4,000 families. The last chapter of the Social and Emotional Wellbeing publication deals with the impact on children of members of the Stolen Generation, and it highlights the aspect of mental illnesses and the debilitating impact that in caring for somebody from the Stolen Generation has had on them and their likelihood of success in other areas. And I know that when we produced that chapter and we provided it to the Commonwealth, at the time the Commonwealth agency asked for empirical data and evidence that our findings had some substance to them. But the report certainly showed that when you look after somebody who has been traumatised or who has been significantly hurt, where there is both an emotional, psychological scar, both within the mind and on the heart, then it is, and there are subsequential flow-on effects from that. I would hope that as governments prevail for at least the next decade, that we set some long-term vision around how we reach all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander families. When we think that there is only 700,000 Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander families, we break them into family units, then that reduces the number. But if we take the notion or the concept that 25% of Aboriginal families are in working environments where the income and their salary is sustained through jobs, then it means that we only have to really focus on 75%. And when you consider that number in the context of government services, then we should alleviate those pressure points around education, justice, health, and other government services, including housing. I want to acknowledge all of those members of the Stolen Generation. And let me say that the National Stolen Generations Alliance supports the implementation of the recommendations from the Bringing Them Home report. The report's introduction in part states, for individuals, their removal as children and the abuse they experience at the hands of the authorities or their delegated have permanently scarred their lives. The harm continues in later generations, affecting their children and grandchildren. And what they then say is, in no sense has the inquiry been raking over the past for its own sake. The truth is that the past is very much with us today in the continuing devastation of the lives of Indigenous Australians. That devastation cannot be addressed unless the whole community listens with an open heart and mind to the stories of what has happened in the past, and having listened and understood, commits itself to reconciliation, walking and working together, and in unity mend what was the past, but build for a future that strengthens our nation. Thank you, Deputy Chair.